All right, everyone. Welcome to the show. Thank you to all that came out and are here for a good hour to discuss this interesting cultural phenomenon. I'm Chris Poulos, a member of the Humble Holy Laity, and I'm here to discuss things that occur in the psyches and spirits of people throughout the culture. Ever had those times where you may find your mind wandering as to why you're into something or why you like that movie or book or person you just met? All of these emotional things and psychological things are really important, especially with the mental health crisis we have today. And also with just the general boredom crisis, I have to say that that's an issue. I think people are really, really burnt out in our modern society to an artificially exaggerated extent. I've had some shows where I'm like, all work and no play. We're far beyond that. We're like all more like all pulling your hair out at 30 and giving up on everything and just taking your meds. I mean, that's where we're at. So these little things that we're into in terms of entertainment, in terms of what we're seeing in politics, are really windows into the unconscious or the subconscious. And vampires actually are a lot more important than I realize. So to the what you would see the left of me, I I have Eddie Murphy from Vampire in Brooklyn. Man, that's a funny movie. Also kind of scary, believe it or not. I got to finish it. It's been a while since I've watched it, and I never got even to finish it. But I heard it's pretty hilarious and spooky at the same time. So that's surprising that Eddie Murphy can pull off horror. And then, of course, we have the classic vampire. Um, everyone has, if anyone's seen the 1931 Dracula, one of the most famous ones out there, really typifies the beginning of the new vampire. So there's a few distinctions to be made here. There's the cheesy bourgeois blah, vampire. Like that thing is really new and even really doesn't come out much in the Dracula novel. I mean, there's hints of it, of this aristocratic guy that's evil and a supernatural being, but he looks like a person. But that's really started with the movies from what I've seen. Um, and it's kind of goofy. Um, I hear reports about people actually getting into blood drinking. That's very few and far between. It's still around. But anyone into the vampire culture, really, most of it died out in the 90s and early 2000s. There were less vampire movies at a certain point. People are into other things. And why is it? Why do I find it goofy? Because uh, it's not goofy in the sense that it doesn't point to something. It's just one of those things where it's like people like it, but they themselves aren't really into it. It could be an analogy for different things. It does point to certain phobias we have, but that actually isn't the vampire archetype that I'm that concerned with, other than cultural commentary. Um, so then you have Eddie Murphy. I put him up there because it kind of brings home the point. Just the Western vampire is just kind of a silly image. It's someone who drinks blood. Why? Because different backstories, and somehow he never gets caught. Somehow. He doesn't get stuck on 24/7 news once they find out about his existence, and he doesn't get completely taken to the woodshed by insurance companies and the IRS, because they're going to be like, "Well, who are you? Are you even?" He might get deported for all we know. I mean, being a vampire would not be fun. Um, and I would say if you want to go that route, the closest thing to that would be, some elite globalist, manipulative person. I think those are the closest things to vampires because you're talking about someone that he's above the law, he has enough power and maybe even charisma to do whatever he wants. Um, that would be more along the lines of what I think people are into the Western vampires are for. But the first origin of vampire actually, as I said in the trailer, is from Transylvania itself, as well as other religious superstitions. Apparently, vampirism is found in demonology. That's where we first see them in stories, even back into ancient Mesopotamia. Um, Stories about demons that will either actually drink blood or they are parasitic. Um, and this continued in many different places and different folklore legends, even into current times. The other side of it is the cannibalism found in native Aboriginal religions, which isn't that common, but it's something to take note of because if I asked myself, well, are there real vampires? I would have to say yes. But the yes is completely different from the Western vampire in most regards when it comes to that stuff. And it's much rarer than we realize, and it's done for different reasons. Not that it isn't important, but what Bram Stoker did is he took these ideas and made his own thing. So it's quite a shame that people, when they think of these concepts of the supernatural and they think of these concepts of folklore, they dismiss it in their own skepticism and they think there's nothing important to be learned there because they're blinded by the Hollywood version of it, you know. And that's a big mistake, I think. Um, Even things such as science fiction, if it wasn't for Jules Verne and some really brilliant science fiction minds, that might not have inspired some people to go further into science and give us deep sea exploration, deep sea submarines, the Apollo program. So it's important to keep the imagination working and not to be too skeptical. You might learn something new, you might learn something about um, cultures you never heard of before. Um, so the first thing that looks like the vampire comes from this idea that in Romania, what happens is whenever a region that has pagan religion, most regions do, gets Christianized, a lot of the lore gets reinterpreted through the new spiritual paradigm. You have Halloween, for example, is a well, now again, see, Hollywood once again smeared everything. Halloween is a mixture of rituals from Samhain, the Irish pagan religious festival, with the All Saints Day and All Souls Day celebrations and masses after they were Christianized by St. Patrick and the church, just like many other holidays, wanted to Christianize the paganism because, and that's actually not a bad thing. You see, there are a lot of people that are like, well, the Christians forced them to believe this. Well, that's not true in many regards because St. Patrick didn't have an army, he didn't force anyone. And neither is the case with the Northern Europe, any other Northern Europeans that turned Christian. Many of them had an actual conversion of heart, including the first barbarians that sacked Rome. So I think there's an issue there with the historical criticism of these things, which I see in the internet. A lot of pagans try to, jump at the chance to make Christians look bad. But also, the idea, for example, the idea of praying to the deceased or was a pagan idea, praying to them, the ancestors, but praying for them to God for them to be released from purgatory. Even the idea of ghosts, right? there is a lot of crossover and similarity. So the church wasn't going to throw that baby out with the bathwater. They just were like, well, we'll just focus on the Christian version of that. And so that's where a lot of more stuff about Halloween comes in. Same with the idea of good versus evil spirits. Almost every pagan religion has an idea of good versus evil spirits. It is not an originally a Judeo-Christian idea. In fact, even the idea of let's say the devil being malevolent possibly could have come from the Zoroastrians while the Jews were in captivity under the reign of Cyrus the Great, and they're being released, and Cyrus the Great is lauded as a national hero. Cyrus the Great was a Zoroastrian, and Zoroastrianism had the idea that the devil is actually a bad dude. He's actually malevolent. He wants to drag people down to hell, to hurt God and to ruin the kingdom of God, and just to be nasty. Whereas the Jews thought the devil was actually a servant of God who God, he wasn't malevolent. He was just sent to test people. So there was actually some cultural diffusion there, which is fine. There's revelate. These are revealed religions that change throughout as we learn more about the universe, and we have different vantage points. The theology can change to a certain extent while at the same time keeping in the borders of those religious beliefs. So same with Slavic people. Anyone Slavic here? I have some Slavic in my family. Everyone knows that Slavic people are also very superstitious. Irish and Slavic, boy, there's a lot of stories to be told there, right? And here you have these people that always had these, I would say, more open discussions about the paranormal. Um, and in comes the Catholic Church, and you look at the Catholic Church during the medieval period. Oh, they were really into this stuff, because what you would do back then. The homilies were a little bit more about hell and the devil and the demons, and of course, there's a lot of treatises against witchcraft and things like that. So you have these people in this community probably running into their own pagan religious ideas, or reports of some spirit affecting people. And then the Catholics come. Catholics are not as staunchly against these discussions. That's very much being having a taboo look into the supernatural evil is actually a Protestant idea. Catholic Church has exorcists and holy water and devotions to saints and angels, and different kinds of prayers, and you have the Mass, and you have sacraments, and you have they don't believe in sola scriptura. So if you have someone comes in and it's a doctor of the church could implement a new way to look at Jesus Christ. Same with spiritual warfare. There are great thinkers that expand on spiritual warfare. And even today, when an exorcist goes in to investigate something, if let's just say, in one of these areas, someone comes up to an exorcist and says, "Father, I had a dream, and this demon came out of the dream, and ever since then I've gotten these bite marks or wounds or something." And I think it's the devil. I think the devil's after me. What do I do? And they're crossing themselves. Of course, the exorcist has to maintain skepticism, or the local priest has to maintain some kind of skepticism, but he's not going to completely discard the ideas of an evil entity affecting his flock, right? Just as much as he wouldn't discard the idea of someone committing a big sin and needs to go to confession and heaven and hell, right? A good priest, that is. So if, yeah, it could be dismissed. They could be like, oh, that's just local legends. But he's still probably going to have to investigate that, especially if they're insistent. He's going to have to discern. And if he goes into that house, he won't say, "Oh, ghosts aren't real." If he actually experiences something in there, he'll be like, "Well, I guess I better call the bishop. We better have the house blessed, or this person might be possessed." And there is something called demonology where uh, the clergy do learn, exorcists do learn about these spirits. That may include some of the spirits and folklore of the vampires, right? Of the vampiric spirits, which have been in many different cultures. And God help the poor priest who's in Africa. I mean, Africa folklore and ideas of spirituality. There's several college courses probably on that. I mean, I took actually a course, a course on learning about shamanistic cultures. I might do a broadcast just for shamanism. Oh my gosh, like every tribe has such incredible stories and of different gods and spirits, and it'd be a headache, I'm sure, for some exorcist to have to learn about all that, or some evangelist to have to learn about all that. So that's where it's coming from. It's also, there's also, of course, lack of understanding about science. There things that happen to corpses when they're decaying, but not that decayed. Their hair still grows, their nails still grow, their skin gets white. Um, Certain diseases that can give someone a very scary vampiric look. All of that are also factors, and there's always some confusion. There's people that get things wrong, they make up stories, or they don't understand science, and so that can add to yet more folklore, yet more legends, yet more myths about the supernatural. And that's the first kind of vampire that was there before the novel was published. um, Now, why is that important? Well, I think that in those who are interested in vampires, there is a broader circle of horror enthusiasts who like the adventure of learning about things that go bump in the night. And I think even in those, medieval circles, those people out there in Romania, honestly, we say that us modern folk are more messed up, and we are messed up in many ways. But I don't think we're so far messed up that we can't just say it's human curiosity. I mean, I'm sure, that's where the phrase old wives' tales came from. When there's no TV and there's no internet, I am sure that led great, uh, that fed the curiosity of these people who had nothing to do but farm. And I'm sure they would tell stories either for entertainment, or since they actually believed in some of this stuff, probably just as old wives' tales, as gossip. Did you hear what happened over there? Right? That's always going to be a part of the human experience. I think that we would be remiss in um, trying to avoid all curiosity for the sake of a puritanical understanding of these things. Not in the sense that it would be it's not dangerous, but in the sense that we have to, if we want to understand why people are into this, um, we have to just admit that it's a part of us, right? It's a part of us to hear about something breaking into our reality, even if it's bad. It's called morbid curiosity. We all have it. Hello, St. John Beloved, Carol Naughton, John C., Aline. See who else is here. Sweet Harmony just made it in. Thanks for coming out, guys. And why do we have that curiosity? Well, I think that there is an artistic uh, there's an artistic beauty to the nighttime that is in the hearts and minds of many people. It seems we have some internet troubles. One second here. Ooh, can anyone see me? Okay, I think we're okay now. I'm using a better internet than usual, so I'm hoping that this isn't going to be an issue. One second here. All right, we're back. So, people enjoy the nighttime, and they also are drawn into the way things look at the nighttime. They're also It's also a time of peace and solitude, and I think there's something in the psyche that tells us that this is where the uh, the line between the natural and the supernatural thins. That's the case for many. Religions believe that, and including many Christians believe that nighttime is when there are more spiritual things happening. And of course, there's also the fact that it's because our brains slow down and get ready for sleep, get ready for dreams, and as our biological clocks begin to head towards snoozing time, psychologically and neurologically, we have less filters. We're more focused. We're more apt to notice things. It's a combination of a lot of things, and because of that, I think people um, they want to explore because this is the time to relax, to be on your own, to learn about something, to kind of unwind and have a thrill or two. I think that's the impetus for a lot of horror enthusiasts as well as this. Um, so there's also the belief that people can be involved in evil, involved in evil in ways that are seemingly attractive, glamorous, exciting. They can use our human curiosity to something very bad. Now, before I get into the obvious ways in which we are seeing this spirit of twisted curiosity in our culture, um, I'm going to stick with the supernatural for a few more minutes. So when it comes to things, or not just supernatural or um, very powerful. So you had in these towns aristocrats that were, some of them are very good, some of them were very bad, some of them were just awful people. Uh, And because of that, you had this gossip, I'm sure, the old wives' tales, right? Or perhaps just general town gossip about the king or queen or whatever aristocrat was running the place. Because the aristocrat would get to live in this beautiful castle, and everyone else had to, as Monty Python, as Monty Python would say, "Oh, how do we know they're peasants? Well, there's crap all over them. They're just drowning in mud and poop." There's this funny Monty Python scene, um, which is a bit of an exaggeration as to how bad things could get, but that was the case. The king and the queen were allowed to wear beautiful, and all the noblemen and women and anyone in the cast were allowed to live in luxury, and everyone else lived extremely simply. And if you had a really bad king or queen, I'm sure that people were talking bad behind them all the time. I'm sure everyone, including the advisors, including the diocesan priest, the maids in the kitchen making the food, the knights, the peasants, I'm sure everyone was talking really bad about them. Um, and so this was already this idea of someone that has given power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, is part of the vampire fear or the vampire charm or the danger of the vampire. Um, And of course, today we don't have kings and queens, but we have politicians, which are even worse, it seems. Because back then, you didn't have to, if you were bad, you didn't have to necessarily pretend you were a bad guy. You could just be a brute. You could just be, I'm the king or the queen, and you do what I tell you to do, and that's that. But now we have, now you have to be a little more slick. You have to get some more donations from China. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say that? You have to hide things on laptops. Oh, sorry, guys. You have to go to islands with underage prostitutes. I don't even buy that. And I wonder how underage they really are. Uh, you have to do all these. Oh, and you have to get on campaign trail, and you say, "Come on, man! I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you live your dreams." You have to pretend you're a good guy. So the intrigue only gets worse. Um, and that's, again, now we're getting more into the psychological stuff, but that's where it comes from, that if you were to do something really bad or something bad was to happen, it might not have to be completely hidden. It could be hidden in plain sight, as the saying goes. It could be hidden under a veneer of majesty and royalty and success and smiles and attractive people and all these other things. Um, and that also includes, I'm going to go into the occult for a second. That includes any sort of taboo spiritual things done. Um, Now, was that going on during back in the day? Yes, so there definitely it was going on back in the day. Not maybe not by the royalty necessarily, but there was Elizabeth Bathory, fame. She's see whenever you run into any rare case of an actual vampire type person, they're way worse than old Drac. Vlad Tepes, if those stories are true, at least Drac wines and dines you before he bites your neck. Vlad Tepes just impaled you, and that's and if he did, he supposedly dipped his bread in your blood. So he didn't even give you the chance to be schmoozed into it, or maybe you're sleeping. He just violently destroys you, and that's another problem I have with us being too against curiosity, because if the people that are often most gullible are often those, like I've complained about before in a previous episode, that want to completely stick their head in the sand when it comes to someone really being that bad. They are usually the first to go. They are the suckers. And no pun intended again. I mean, we're seeing it play out in our culture, and it's only going to get worse because there's two different narratives being pulled out by the media and by corporations. I know consumer psychology. I know what these corporations are doing. Any corporation that has the stock photo, um, Hallmark card looking advertising things where it's a utopia on Earth and everyone's smiling. Not only is it creepy and unrealistic, but they're playing on a person who's usually very weak who wants to believe everything's fine. And it's actually not necessarily a strength to always look for what's soft and marshmallowy and happy, because usually people that do that are trying to escape from the reality of things. Okay, so let's be real as to why people are into spooky stories and horror. I mean, even in Christian circles, you see all kinds of people. Oh boy, whenever someone mentions a satanic witch coven or whatever, oh, you can get all the views in the world. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. That may not even be a good curiosity, but just coming from my experience, it's there. Okay, we all are interested in this. It's not if whether or not people want to be evil. Maybe that's a little bit more of a varied discussion, but it is that we have to acknowledge it, right? We have to acknowledge that because we see it. If you actually open your eyes, you can see it in reality. And the vampire is just a representation of things that we don't even want to go into, whether it be about ourselves or other people. Um, that's my point. I'm not saying it's okay to be a vampire. I'm not saying that the vampire isn't a bad guy. I'm saying that to say, why are people into this? They need to knock it off, or they'll turn into vampires, or they'll be interested in it, is a reductive statement. It's not really a good thing to do, because you have to understand. Yeah, knowledge is power. You have to understand why people are doing that in order to unravel it. In order to really unravel it, you have to do it. Um, Grandpa Munster. Um, so the idea of someone being sinister behind the scenes is why people are obviously into it. And also, there's a bridge from the supernatural evil to the natural, which is also very important. Um, if you don't have that understanding that people can be really bad and they can go even further and be supernaturally bad, then you're not going to be prepared for the fact that we all have an abyss and we can all sink into it, and there's a part of us that could be that corrupted. That's the other issue. So, how is a vampire? There's going to go through a whole list of different things. How is a vampire not a representation of, let's say, the nightlife, right? People going out, people partying. How is that not a representation of that? I mean, even when this novel came out, now it wasn't intended to do this, but when this novel came out and people started reading it, if you were a good girl, you wouldn't read Dracula. It was considered an erotic novel. I mean, it does have erotic elements to it. When you actually read the whole thing, it is clearly not an erotica novel, not a romance novel or something meant to be steamy. It's something that's meant to use the erotic and the attractive to scare people to thinking, wow, like could some really attractive person might not have the best interest at heart. Um, so that's where it came from, and there was always that side to it. Um, and even the movies started to really capitulate and really capitalize on that idea. But it's actually, although it's stupid, although I think it's just so dumb to have this guy who's like in a castle hiding in plain sight with fangs, and no one like eventually busts down his doors and like just burns the place to the ground. Um, no one bothered to do that. There were no whistleblowers. That's hard to imagine, unless it's a politician. If a vampire politician, yes, I can believe that. Um, so, but that's always been there, and so if we just actually just looked at the vampirism and we looked at it and say this is a representation of the nightlife, the sexual revolution, the the young person who wants to hook up, right, to do drugs, to party. I mean, and then, of course, just on the notion of drugs, we have drugs that make people already. We're addicted up the wazoo in so many different ways. Look at crystal meth. I mean, that's basically it right there. It's much scarier, honestly. Crystal meth turns people into vampires. That's for sure. I mean, they're just not injecting blood. They're injecting something that would kill them probably faster, as far as I know. I mean, if there was a blood addiction, all you need was what? O negative type blood, and you're good. You just need a blood bank, and that's that. Um, that's people that are actually into blood drinking. It seems to be some kind of psychological, those that if you know any particular places that actually do that, and yes, there apparently are, but it's probably very rare. It's probably a psychological thing mixed with the goth culture, mixed with probably some spiritualism from time to time. Um, but that definitely would be a psychological thing, not a physical thing. Um, Sweet Harmony says, I think vampires are a symbol for the narcissist and sociopaths of society. Right. And that's my second thing. So So maybe if we just look at it like that, how many people have used their own natural talents of personality, made cults of personality that are malevolent. This happens all the time from childhood to college to even today. And that is a vampiric attribute. I mean, in fact, I would say that the vampires stories haven't really, because they're all romance erotic novels, um, for lustful women, and that's basically the main thing these days. I mean, come on, like Tom Cruise and what was the other guy? The Interview with the Vampire. I mean, there's just not that many vampire stories about an aging homeless guy who needs to drink blood or something, right? It's usually an attractive person. That's what it's been turned into. But the idea of a vampiric person with a force of will that is just almost otherworldly, a very manipulative person, that is an area which could be explored much more. And yes, that's another example of a vampire. In fact, I did not know this. I thought this was a term used in Marvel comic books, but it is actually a psychological term now used by some psychologists called an energy vampire. That is an action of usually a type 2 narcissist or some other antisocial personality disorder where it actually has specific traits where that person always absorbs the energy of a uh, social gathering or of friends or acquaintances and makes it all about themselves, or they cling on to someone like a parasite and always wants attention from them and things from them. I mean, that's a very broken person, but you have that, and uh, there's all kinds of sexual predators. That's another whole other kind of vampirism. So again, this is clearly our subconscious looking. See, fiction can do different things. Fiction can either be a purely abstract idea that comes from an artistic or scientific mind or both to relay unique story, or it could be something that has some originality to it, but is a rebranding of what we see already. And not only are the customers interested, the readers of the books, the watchers of the movies, but I think the author, especially if it's good, is interested in the same conversation and already drawn into that interest. Okay, that there's a saying that almost every psychologist has a psychologist. A lot of people, for example, get into psychology, for example, because they themselves have their own issues and they want inner healing, and they want to teach others how to be inner healed. And it's same is the case with spirituality. There are many um, wounded healers that are saints. There are many people getting into other spiritualities that are completely different from the mainstream religions, like Reiki and all these things, yoga. Um, all these things they divulge into different paths, but they come from an inherent thirst, an inherent brokenness, or something that's missing. And that can turn into good or bad outcomes. For example, you could have a person who's into vampires because they're more into just straight horror, and they maybe they deep down want to be someone who is like a neighborhood watch for evil. They might be the same people that look up conspiracy theories and so on and so forth. They might be the same people that really have had run-ins with evil from humans, and they really want to convince themselves that there is such a thing out there that's really that bad. You can have another person that's watching a vampire movie or reading a vampire book who is lonely and wants more interesting friends. And, of course, that can turn into the bad crowd. But it is a shame that many people can't flip it or dissect it and be like, well, if you're into this, maybe there's a good thing you can take from that and leaving out the bad. Perhaps they do need a better group of friends. Maybe they do need better hobbies or a better sense of adventure fulfilled. Who knows? Or they're an aspiring writer. Maybe this is a calling for them to be a writer or something like that. But that's part of it. That's part of the collective unconscious. I also think that there is a very strange pattern when it comes to immortality and vitality. That's another thing that the vampires really represent. And that is actually of the deepest of all questions. And I think the most important, but I think people need to unravel the first level of these questions in order to eventually end up to that question, the immortality and vitality question. Um, People are very skeptical of anything involving the afterlife these days, and that's a shame. To be completely honest, it's appalling that we live in a society that's all about life extension, and uh, and we all, with the internet, we all know the realities of death, and yet we run away from it. We pretend as if we're okay with this life being all that there is, whether we openly say we don't believe in anything or we don't live like there's anything out there. I think there's a lot of people that inherently don't believe to the enough. They'll say they believe it as a comfort, but they don't really live out that idea. Um, but in order to get there, we have to unravel all of these, because most of the people that are into this there are people that are usually very depressed or lonely, or maybe they're not, but they still feel as if this life we have here is boring and unfulfilling ultimately, and they're feeling something that's lifting them towards the what if question about eternity, because that's what a vampire does. He's immortal. He's immortal in a bad sense, but that's what he is. It's better than nothing, and he gets to keep his youthful prime. Usually, I don't know. It depends on the story. So that's actually an inherent yearning for there to be more than this, and of course to have youth, to have full health. Um, but people won't get there in this understanding until they unravel, well, why am I drawn to this psychologically? Because if you're not used to unraveling these questions, you can't unravel the biggest one. Um, and unfortunately, there are many people that take advantage of this ignorance. Oh, there's the beauty industry, there's plastic surgery, there's obsessions with all kinds of ways to look popular and successful. All these things don't really add up or make people any happier, but they definitely are trying to fill that void. um, which leads me to the point, I'm like, why are there no, like, dark or aesthetically dark literature books that are based on good things, like the books on what it would be like to run into someone with a glorified body. You see, the vampire mythos has a bit of a Catholic hint in it. I don't know if it was consciously done by Bram Stoker or if it was accidental, but um, this does lead, funnily enough, if you know enough theology, it leads to the Catholic understanding about the resurrection. Um, if you look into the glorified body, which is the theology of what people will be when they are resurrected in God's good grace, when the new heaven and new earth happens, yeah, there's some pretty interesting parallels there. Perfect in every way, as much as you possibly can be, given what you've done, and God is in a body as well that's all completely perfect. Everything is redeemed and mystical and beautiful. Even intangibility. Apparently, you can walk through walls. You get ghost powers essentially. What else? You can instantly move from one place to the next. It's all there, and so there is some kind of spiritual yearning there, which sadly is harnessed into other spiritualities that like for example Satanism and other other pretty sinister things that people do just to have a taste of that. It could be the drugs again, like I've said. It could be sex. It could be getting involved in the wrong crowd, and it could be Satanism. But it's not enough to just say those things are bad, because you have to admit that if you're going to go by our Western principles of what's evil and what's good, evil is a twisting of what's good, right? So you just can't help but wonder, well, if we looked at the good flip side of that, what would we get? We would get something very wholesome and beautiful. So why are there people going to satanic masses, and the cults on the rise? Well, you know, maybe some of them want power and some of them are just evil, but there's also, I think, people that never got that from the Catholic Church, which is supposed to give you those experiences, that intimacy with something otherworldly, aka God, the ultimate. I don't know. I can't completely judge everyone. That definitely not people that are involved in witchcraft, because there's all different kinds of people. Some people just dabble in it. Other people are super into it. Other people are in it for different reasons. Same with all kinds of things that would resemble a vampire. But even let's say a Satanist who actually does perform things that are like that. Well, according to an ex-Satanist, Zachary King, he had a conversion experience, and he has a very interesting take on it. And he said that he was a curious kid who was brought into basically into he was predated on by a coven, and he eventually long story leading up to his conversion. And he says, yes, he did not have what he had back then. Nature abhorred a void. He learned to detest his rigorous parents' religious background, and that made him kind of rebellious to look for what he didn't realize was there in the church. See, I mean, again, like, I don't want to be too on the nose here, but like drinking blood for immortality. Well, what do Catholics do? Of course, we we don't do it for any sort of selfish reason. It's the opposite, right? It's selflessness and um, and feeding from an infinite God who loves us, who wants to transform us. If what makes the vampire stuff bad and the occult bad is that you're hurting people and you're hurting yourself, and you're doing things out of a sense of trying to make yourself God. But that doesn't mean that everything about immortality in the afterlife is bad. So that's the main question, and that's the main problem that needs to be addressed. Um, that's what I'm getting at. Like, if we just kept going down this path of thinking, what about even things like corporations and all of these media outlets? So what about the fact that Burger King puts addictive stuff in their burgers to make people come back? What about that? I haven't had Burger King in a while, but I tell you what, when I used to eat Burger King, it was just the best burgers ever. And then I realized it wasn't real meat. So I'm like, what are they doing with the thing? There are people that are addicted to food. There are people that coffee addicts. Anything involving you need something to make yourself feel more than you are, and you have a dependence on it. It's all very vampiric, right? It's all trying to tap into something that uh, maybe isn't necessarily bad, but the methodology is bad, or it's been twisted to have a bad outcome, or um, a bad release, and you don't know until you know how messed up you are. Um, so that's my spiel for the day on why vampires are so interesting to most people. And I do think there's a vampire epidemic. I think it's getting worse and worse. I think that people are becoming more vampiric, and it will only be unraveled until we look at it from a Socratic point of view, and we say, okay, what are the good things that can replace these bad things? Or what is the twisted good thing deep down in there that um, we might, if we purified, would actually be amazing? What if all of these kids that get into dark things were led into, instead of dark things that can lead them into trouble or to drugs, they're led into some alternative fashions, Victorian fashions, or perhaps we have a ball, we have candles, we're going to have a gala, we're going to, we're going to have more artistic outlets. We're going to talk about contemplative spirituality, and we're going to have more competitions in literature and things like that. We're going to have more discussions about um, different kinds of cultures. And you'd be surprised. As a teacher, there are absolutely no outlets anymore. It is a complete robot, cubicle, communist 1984 program now. There's only the bad is really promoted. It's one. Another example would be uh, like what happens to every modern music genre, almost every modern music genre. Like when hip hop and rap came out, like for the first 2 years, it was this cool thing where you could dance and you could kind of rap poetry, and it was fun. And then if next thing you know, it completely transferred over to gangster rap, and then even worse stuff, into just complete sexualized, chauvinistic, macho gangster stuff, sexualization of women, right? But that doesn't mean that dancing is evil, right? Or even athletic dancing or singing or anything like that, or a party is bad. It just means it was twisted. We can't go around saying food is evil because McDonald's exists or cheesecake exists. We have to be very careful, or we'll just be dismissed as loons. Honestly, anyone that thinks that this is an unhealthy thing, and I also think it will help cure. Looking at it this way will help cure the boredom of our society, of our this emptiness that we have. Um, So the list goes on and on. Thanks for coming out, those that did. Good to see you here, Adam Bomb, Sweet Harmony. Um, any Catholics here? Spread those indulgences coming up next week, right? Of course, we have All Saints Day, but we also have All Souls Day. We can retake. This is our shtick. They took anyone that's promoting the Hollywood version of Halloween or whatever else version of Halloween. Um, they're just taking what was supposed to be our thing, which is, there's actually indulgences. For example, here's the last point for, because I have a lot of religious viewers, but anyone that's watching that isn't be interested in this. There's actually something called an indulgence that the church gives where you can go to a gravestone and during this coming week and you pray for the deceased and it actually will release them. It's like special grace is allotted for doing that, praying a heartfelt prayer to God to release them from purgatory to get them closer to heaven. That's pretty cool. That's pretty edgy. I like that stuff. The Eastern churches, as well as some of the traditional churches, do have beautiful masses involving that. And I don't know how many people go to the graves, but it's a wonderful practice, beautiful, loving practice, right? And I'm sure very, very artistic practice. They have beautiful candles and things like that. Um, Again, like I said, the idea of ghosts, again, a lot of Protestants will be like, "Oh, ghosts are bad." Well, yeah, like usually what we believe in is evil spirits do disguise themselves as Uncle Louie, But if a someone runs into a soul that's asking for prayers, that's all systems go. That's probably God allowing a soul in purgatory to work to have some mercy and have his loved ones pray for him. So ghosts, that's right up the alley, or anything involving, calling on angels and saints or fighting the devil, that all of this stuff I think we should be more open about and probably would draw more of a crowd, as long as we're humble about it. So yes, that's more points to what I'm trying to say here. um, yeah, take back the good part, take back the good and beautiful, but leave out the creepy pervy stuff, uh, you know, and have fun. Having fun is important. I believe St. Thomas Aquinas said that it can be a vice to not have fun, to be a constant bore or an energy vampire. Um, so that's my complete stream now for Halloween. I hope you guys have a great one. Hope to see you out there in Utopiana, which is another show coming up, which is going to talk more about Catholics rising up and really claiming their spirituality. It's 8 p.m. Eastern with me and Thomas. So I'm just doing a little shoe in there. Shout out to Thomas if he's watching. Hope to see you all there, and hope you enjoy the discussion. God bless.